Voices from the Mausoleum is brought to you by the You Run Podcast Network and yourunpodcast.com. And a very special thank you to our Patreon subscribers. Be sure to check out the Paranormal Misfits podcast, your favorite besties fearlessly exploring the paranormal, uncovering enigmatic mysteries, unraveling mind-bending conspiracies, and sharing thoughts on horror. Prepare to be spellbound. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Hello and welcome to another edition of Influential Horror. Steve, as always, not as always, I guess Angel does most of these, but Steve here today. And with me, a special guest. We just sort of met on Twitter and then X, whatever it's called now. Jordan from Media13 on YouTube. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, I mean, so I think now I'm like totally blanking. I think I came across your tweet on Twitter or something. It was around Scream, right?
I do tweet a lot about that, so that probably checks out.
Yeah. Well, Scream's in a very interesting place right now. So I think, and then I was like, let me check out his channel. And you do some really awesome like video essays.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, no, I love your format. I love the way that you dive in to the genre. So tell me a little bit about like how you got started. Before we dive into your influential horrors, like I love, want to learn a little bit about you. Like what brought you to YouTube and
Well, so I think that the main thing that brought me to YouTube at first, being like blunt and honest, is that there was no one really that I was friends with that could put up with me talking about films for as long as I wanted to.
a lot of us aren't actually.
Yeah, and it wasn't until I was like after seeing a film one night, I was speaking to my friend about it. And he was like, have you thought about doing like a YouTube channel for this sort of thing? And honestly, I hadn't. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, that sounds like really good idea. So that started in like 2018, I think. I know the film that I saw that made me start doing it was Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. The less said about that, the better. But it's got me to where I am here, so I can't really complain with that. But yeah, it's been going for 6 years now. 6 years in August, just there this month actually.
Oh, congratulations!
And yeah, I'm really happy with how it's going. I'm really glad that I did it. It's connected me with some like really cool people, yourself included. And yeah, I started off making the whole gimmick that I had with the channel at first was that I wanted to say I wasn't a fan of this film. Here's how I would do it better. And I did eventually realize that no one wants to hear someone who doesn't know that much about film talking about that sort of thing. So I then transitioned into reviews, and then eventually into video essays, which I've been doing for the best part of about 2.5 years now.
Yeah. Well, I think we whether or not you go to school for film, right, or like you just come at it as a lover of film, right? I think we all start to we know what we like, and I think we start to pick up on this like on techniques kind of regardless, and we understand sort of, like what makes a good film and character, and so like don't cut yourself too short there with no one wanting to hear your take.
No, well, it's one of those things where obviously from doing this, I have learned a lot about films. I've learned a lot more of the technical terms than I did when I first started. And yeah, it wasn't something that I've not been to school to study film specifically. I took a media studies class when I was in high school. Part of that class name is actually where I got the Media13 name. The other half just being that I like unlucky numbers. But yeah, it was just one of those things where I didn't want to be one of these people who were just, a lot of the time when I was looking at the critiques of a film, it felt more, it didn't feel as though it was coming across from what I personally like from films is to enjoy them. I do obviously, like if you've seen some of the videos, you know that I do talk a little bit about the like techniques, filmmaking techniques. But a large part of what I like doing with the videos is taking more of like an emotional look at them and looking at them not only from like an enjoyment level, but also studying them on like a character basis almost, like I've done with the likes of Grace from Ready or Not and stuff like that.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic! Yeah. No, I think that's a great approach. I think that's how we connect with movies, right? Is on the emotional level, right? I think because most people who enjoy movies didn't study film from an academic perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's an art form, but it's also entertainment, and so there's like this weird like line between the two. But yeah, no, I think you nailed it there. I think coming from that emotional connection and focusing on that piece is a great angle to come from.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I tried doing more like sort of critical video essays in the beginning, but I wasn't really a fan of it. I couldn't if I can't enjoy writing a script for one of my videos, I can't justify doing it. If that makes sense, like there needs to be some level of positivity that I'm taking from a video script to not only enjoy doing it but to end up putting it out there. Like I don't tend to cover films that I wasn't a fan of that often, and even if I do, I'm then trying to look at it from right. This might not have been great, and I might not have loved it, but what did I love from it? What did I take from this that has kept me thinking about it at least until now?
Yeah, yeah. And so, why horror in general, right? Were you always a horror fan?
I've been a horror fan for like quite a while now. It wasn't always something that I've been. It's not always been like my first love with films. Like, admittedly, I have been a bit. I did grow up loving like comic book movies a lot more. But really, since I've managed to get a bit more independent with the films that I'm watching, I've leaned more into horror. And ever since I'd say maybe I was like 12, 13, that's really been the genre that I've been pushing the most. Even though I have like kept an interest in the other stuff that I do, like horror for a long time has been like the mainstay. It has been the thing that I've like obsessed over the most.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, I'm right there with you. So let's go into some of your favorites then, like sort of the films that have influenced you over the years, the ones that have really just sort of just you can't get out of your head. So the first one, funny enough, did not plan this. Is The Others. I'm actually wearing my Nicole Kidman
Yeah.
"Heartbreak Feels Good in a Place Like This" shirt. Yeah. So why The Others?
It was just it's from what I remember, it's my earliest memory of watching a horror film. It was one of the first ones that when I took the media studies class, it was probably I think the first movie that we looked at on like an analysis level and like really picked it apart and just looked at how it worked and the different things about it. And I just remember I don't remember like exactly roughly when it was age wise, but I can still remember how groundbreaking that third act felt to me when everything fell into place and was like revealed. Um, it blew me away, and every time I watch it, still it doesn't like the impact isn't lessened at all.
Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful movie, right? And I
Yeah,
think that's the first movie I can really remember outside of The Sixth Sense where the twist was sort of talked about on like a water cooler level,
yeah,
where it was just people would not shut up about this movie. I mean, rightfully so. I just remember it sort of being a bit of a cultural moment.
yeah. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous too. Like the cinematography, the set design as well. Like the gothic appeal of it. I love every part of that movie.
Yeah, yeah, that aesthetic is I do love a gothic sort of
Yeah,
vibe, and like I feel like we've almost sort of lost a little bit of that practicality when it comes to the set design. Like obviously we see it with a lot of movies, like with like A24, we see it. Anything with Guillermo del Toro, we see it. But Blumhouse, maybe we're not quite getting it as much, right? I always think of
yeah.
but especially this time, I one of my favorite movies, and it gets Angel and I love it, but it gets crapped on. Is the the 1999 Haunting remake?
I have not
Um,
seen that one.
you've not seen? Okay, so I love the Haunting in general. I mean, the Shirley Jackson novel, the Flanagan series, the original.
I've seen that one. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I've read part of the book. It's still sitting like half finished upstairs.
that's okay. But yeah, do recommend finishing it though. If you have not seen the 63 like original film adaptation,
I've
um
not.
really, yeah, I know it's really good. I also love looking at it as like a film queer study as well. Or queer film study. So especially when you look at the character of Theo, like in the Mike Flanagan series, she's sort of
Yeah,
allowed to be out and proud. And if you go back to the book and the original movie, like Theo's very coded. And then Catherine Zeta-Jones plays her in the 99 film. And she's out as bisexual, but it's almost sort of like a throwaway moment. So to sort of see the evolution of like that character through these different like adaptations is actually really cool to see.
yeah.
Um, But yeah, no. But going back to sort of the gothic aesthetic, the mansion in that 1999 film is some of the best like set design I've seen out of like an American horror film of that era.
I'll have to check that out then, because like with movies like this, especially like the sort of the whole like gothic horror supernatural type thing, I think the set design is so important, because like in the case of the others, the
Hmm.
house is designed so like the house plays such a big role in the movie, and it's designed so well that it almost feels like a character in its own right.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of your like favorite moments from the others?
I remember the first time that I got that real rush of having a jump scare was obviously the moment where Grace goes into the room, sees what she thinks is her daughter um, playing with something, then sees it's the old woman that ends up being like the seance runner, um, and the whole fear of that sticks in my head purely because it was the one time where I got that rush and I was like, yeah, this sort of thing's for me. I enjoyed
Yeah.
this. Obviously the twist, you can't like list your favorite parts from the others and not talk about the just how like groundbreaking that thing is. And then not only that, but how much more clever it feels on a rewatch when you like notice pick up on other little things that happen throughout.
Hmm. Well, we don't really get a lot of movies like that. I mean, the twist is, them being dead and then coming from
Yeah,
the perspective of the spirits. But we don't really get a lot of like perspective of the spirit world, in our stories as much. Like we get like the Further in like the Insidious movies, right? We get
yeah.
a little bit of Elise, like, but not like it would be cool to sort of explore that more. I don't know, maybe there are some movies I'm just not thinking about right now, but
There's probably some out there. It's just they're maybe not as well known as the likes of the others or something like that.
yeah, yeah, I would love to sort of because there is stuff I would, we were talking about this in influential I had just done, but like to do like a really good ghost story, you know, th- like, there's like a real sadness that
Yeah,
you have to kind of touch on, right? Because really you're dealing with like death and loss and grief, and like the mark of a good ghost story, right, is like touch on like these deep, like kind of like you're saying, like these emotional levels.
yeah. I mean
um,
that's one part that, because the sort of theme of tragedy and grief is so present in that movie, like with the setting of it being set post World War II, the whole arc surrounding the husband returning. There's so much like just bleakness and sadness written throughout that movie, but it's done in a way where it never becomes overbearing. It just becomes it's present enough that it's always there, lingering. Um, and yeah, the whole tone of the film just it does nothing but like service that and make like elevate it even more.
oh, absolutely. All right, shall we go on to number two?
We can do, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I see my man Ghostface behind you, so we're
yeah.
gonna talk. We're talking about Scream.
We are. The first one in particular. It's my favorite movie of all time. I don't. People who know me are like sick of hearing me talk about this thing. I could speak for hours about it. It's something that I've wanted to cover on my own channel for the longest time. But whenever I get halfway through writing a script for it, I scrap it because I'm really worried that I'm not going to do it the way that I want it to be done. But I absolutely love this thing. It's revolutionized how I look at horror. It's yeah, my mind is blanking just because there's that much I want to say on it. I love Neve Campbell, and like I think she's still probably Sydney is my favorite final girl in any horror film. There are some that comes close, but I don't think any quite reach that same level. Um, I think the way that it does the whole reveal of the two killers is amazing, because the first time I watched that, I never saw it coming. And I was really happy that a few years back for the 25th anniversary, I managed to see it on the big screen.
Yeah.
Because obviously, me being a 2000s kid, I was born after the film came out, which I'm very upset about, but I've been able to make up for it since.
Yeah, good thing for these re-releases. Then
I
I feel
know.
like they do them a lot now, which is especially all the big anniversaries. It gives us a lot of opportunities to
Yeah.
experience that. But yeah, no, Scream. I mean, they right. I mean, groundbreaking. Was 1996. I too was. I was born, but I was too young. I'm a '90s kid. I was born in '90, so I was 5 when it came out.
Yeah.
So I saw it on VHS at a sleepover. And, you know, for like the 3 years, I don't know what this mom was thinking letting us put it on, but it was like in that time between, I think 2 had maybe just come out, 3
Yeah.
had not been out yet. So it was just the 2 movies. And we put it on and we were like we were all terrified. Like I think we only watched the Drew Barrymore scene and we were like, nope, we're good. And then that's all I knew of Scream for a few years until I actually had like, you know, I was able to sort of, you know, kick up the bravery to actually watch it. But yeah, I mean, so much to be said about Scream. I know, like I know we can't cover everything in one video, especially when we're talking about other movies. But like,
I know.
obviously, the meta aspect. You know, had you watched a lot of horror movies before seeing Scream, or was Scream sort of an intro to? And like, you know, what I
Scream
mean,
Scream was one of those movies that I'd never like. I saw a lot of clips from it before I managed to see the whole movie. I think I Scream definitely was like nowhere near the first horror movie I watched. But it was definitely early on, and from then it was just like, even after watching it for the first time, I was like, yeah, this is now the standard that I'm going to compare every horror movie to when I see it.
yeah,
Um, but it's funny that you mentioned the opening scene as well, because that is it's so well done. And I think it's slept on how scary this movie can be on a first viewing. Like I think it's difficult for a lot of people to see that, given that on rewatches it becomes more comedic and the self-aware aspects become more present than the horror itself.
sure,
But like that opening scene, that could work as a short film on its own, and it's genuinely terrifying. The idea of how grounded that thing is set, it stuck with me for days after I saw it for the first time. And I think it's probably one of the main components why it ended up being like my favorite movie, and why it's like stayed so like prevalent in my mind even until now.
yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting. You know, I think yeah, because we were saying you know, how we met. I think was we were talking about Scream on like
Yeah,
Twitter, X, whatever. And it is interesting how I think we often forget how scary those movies can be if done well. And we have almost sort of, I think, right, the meta aspect because it is a horror comedy, but like
yeah.
it's never, yeah, I would say like Scream, and this is not a knock on the franchise because I love the franchise. But it's never reached that level of terror as that opening scene in the first movie.
I know. I think it has come close. Like getting off topic a little bit. For all the faults that people might have with the fifth one, I personally do love it. I
Oh, I love
think
it too.
that film does a really good job in my eyes of making Ghostface feel like a horror character, like out and out horror character again. I think the
Hmm.
certain ways that he is framed in that film, the only film that I can think of that does it any closer is the first one. So I think that in terms of looking at Ghostface purely as a horror character, I think the first and fifth frame best.
Yeah. Oh, the fifth movie has some of like my favorite uh tension moments.
Yeah,
Like I think obviously the car scene in Scream 2 I think is really good. But and the Gale chase I think is really good up until she gives up at the end and I'm like, why are you giving up? What's happening? That's my why you count I don't, you know what I mean? That never felt like Gale to me. Her just sort of like crouching in the corner. So that always kind of gets to me. But
yeah.
the hospital, like where he's behind Jenna Ortega, and
One of my
then
favorite scenes in the franchise.
great. And the Hicks and her son.
Yeah,
I think that's
another really good one.
though it's so good. And I think obviously people get so not to get the politics of Scream is insane right now, but
Yeah,
the
a little bit.
what?
Just a little bit, yeah.
Just a little bit. But yeah, I truly think you take those two scenes and it's like some of the best of friendship. But anyway, we're talking about the first one.
Yeah, we are.
The yeah, no, incredible. I mean, any other favorite bits that you sort of want to dive into before we go to the next movie?
I really there's like it just comes down to a lot of the little meta moments and the little self-aware moments. Like one of these, like whenever I'm watching it with someone for the first time, like I showed my girlfriend the movies just last month, um, and it like took everything in me to not keep pausing it and going. So the cool thing about this part is, but one part in particular that I really love is the scene with Randy on the couch. The whole like sort of Jamie, he's behind you.
Yeah.
Um, because at the time when I first saw it, I didn't have a clue that the actor's name was Jamie Kennedy. And so it wasn't until maybe like a year or so later that I learned it for the first time. And I was
Oh
like,
yes, yeah.
oh, I see what they're doing there.
It's meta on meta.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole Tatum scene in the garage is also really, really good. And just the third act in general, like I know it's difficult to say third act because it takes up near enough half of the movie probably, if not just less. But the whole thing in the Stumacher house is just it's some of my favorite stuff in horror. I love the design of the house.
Hmm.
Um, I can't describe what I would give to spend the night in that house. Um, but yeah, just amazing. I
Well, you
love the
could
whole.
have if you
It's
shelled out
great.
the money at Airbnb. Did you know they did that?
I did not. I'm gonna have to look into that now.
Yeah, I don't. Well, it's probably over now, but they were doing it as a promotion for Scream 5,
All right.
and
Yeah. Yeah. Probably
Airbnb
is
was
over
sort of
now.
a thing. And like, I'm pretty sure that I think it was David Arquette did a video where it's like, come stay at the Scream house.
Oh,
Yeah, it's like in
I must
California.
have missed all that when it was happening.
It was part of the marketing, but it wasn't like the huge part of the viral
Mhm.
marketing. But I remember them doing it. But yeah, my favorite, one last favorite bit. It's a quote that doesn't get mentioned like at all. I've never see Scream Twitter talk about it. It's with Linda Blair when she's cameos as the reporter, and she's like, "How does it feel to almost be brutally butchered?"
Yeah. Do you know that's a line to me that, in a weird way, it's almost so on the nose that it feels as though it's something that you could hear in like one of the scary movie parodies, like of this, and it wouldn't feel too out of place. It's that sort of level of like I say, just on the nose, almost comedic line delivery. And I agree. I think that should be brought up a lot more. Admittedly, it's something that I'd completely forgot about until you brought it up just there, but it's such a great line.
It's so good. Well, I mean, that's the other thing is I mean, Sydney's a fantastic character, but I
Yeah.
think right, I think, but the love for her, I think sometimes overshadows like the Wes Craven touch, the Williamson stuff, like surrounding Sydney, because like Scream, like to its DNA, right, is like just a love letter to horror, and
Yeah.
obviously referencing like, well, with the Linda Blair thing, right? That was like such a like how we exploit these things in media, right? And like, so there's just so much to Scream that's just beyond like one character story, right? That there's just so like it's so on the pulse of society, that movie.
Yeah. I think it also is the love for Sydney, while justified. I think it sometimes also takes away from just the great cast in general that especially the first film has. You know, you're looking at Courtney Cox, who is coming off the back of I think season one or season two of Friends.
Yeah.
We've got David Arquette, who is also great. You know, those three is like a trinity going through the five films. Honestly, I don't think they're talked about as a trio nearly enough as they should be.
You sure?
Really just seems to be Sydney that gets the limelight a lot of the time. And again, justified. She is an amazing character, but I do think that Gale and Dewey are equally responsible for why Scream is such a hit.
Yeah. Gail's my favorite character.
Completely fair. I've
It's
got a
like
soft
I
spot for Dewey.
and Dewey's, yeah. I mean, I think everyone has, yeah.
I did have a soft spot for Dewey.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, as much as I could talk about Scream all day, you're number three. Uh, I have not talked. I have not had anyone I think bring this up as a favorite that I've done. Maybe Angel has, but record. Yeah.
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, tell me about that.
Probably I maybe one of the first foreign horror films that I ever watched. I'm still nowhere near as like versed in them as I want to be. But yeah, it was one of those things where I love found footage. It's probably up there as one of my favorite genres next to slashers. And so when I saw the concept of Wreck, when I watched a trailer for it, and instantly I was like, right, I want to watch this movie. So I ended up having to buy like an import Blu-ray. Admittedly, probably paid more than I should have for it.
Yeah.
But I watched it and I fell in love with it. I then had to go and watch like two, three, and four. I kind of regret watching four, but the first one is really the one that has stuck with me the most. Just I remember it was at a point I watched it maybe 2, 3 years ago now. So I'm at the point like to sort of contextualize it where I'm not really that phased by much horror anymore. There's not a lot that scares me. Sort of desensitized to it, but Wreck terrified me. I don't know if it was how claustrophobic it felt or
Mm.
how just like it probably was the claustrophobia, but again, how grounded and real everything felt despite it being such like a heightened scenario. Um, and yeah, I love like the other themes that are prevalent as well. Because obviously you do have the found footage, you've got sort of not they're not zombies, but it's like a sort of form of that. And there's also like a hint of like religious horror there too,
Oh,
like
sure.
that gets revealed in like the third act and more in the second one.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think right that just adds kind of additional layers to it. I love what
Yeah.
you said about the I love claustrophobic horror.
Mhm.
That's why I actually prefer the first Alien to Aliens. Everyone tends
Thank
to
you.
prefer the
Thank you.
sequel, but I think the first one's scarier and it just nails it just so much
Yeah.
better. Obviously the second one's great. I mean, it's fun, but as far as horror goes, like that first one, right? It's just ooh. But yeah, that claustrophobic kind of angle. Um, I don't think anyone loves sort of being confined, unless that's like your thing. Sometimes that's people's things.
Yeah, no, I think I always love like the sort of claustrophobic horror because I think it's one of those things where if I imagine a lot of these horror scenarios in a big open space, they're probably more manageable. But when you condense it down into the sort of the tightened like hallways that are like in wreck so often, like I think back mostly to that stairwell scene where the camera pans down and you can just see the flood of people like rushing up it. Like stuff like that was what really like got me in terms of like a fear factor level because it did feel so like entrapping. It like you felt as though you couldn't breathe even watching it.
Yeah. Oh man, when you can get that sense of like real anxiety from a movie, I mean that's the buy-in, right? If
Yeah.
you can really be along there emotionally with the character on that level, like, oof, yeah. Do you guys have 4D theaters in Scotland?
We may. I'm from like a smaller town closer to England, so I don't know of any like big cinema chains nearby. I have to go to England a lot of the time because it's the closest cinema to me. Um,
Oh, all right. So you got to travel
so
for real.
yeah, so it's only like a half an hour like journey on the train, but at the same time, it's there may like I say there may be 4DX theaters somewhere like further up, but definitely nowhere near where I am.
Okay. Because those are interesting. I've only done it a few times. It could be a little hokey. I usually like to do it for like I've done it for Scream 5 and 6. But I did it after I had seen it already. That
Yeah,
way, I was like, I didn't want that to be like my first experience with the movie.
yeah,
But that would be interesting to sort of like. Well, I guess you can't really mimic the claustrophobic feeling, but at least maybe a little bit. I don't know. I'd be curious to see how if that ever comes if they can kind of get that across
yeah.
with like
I
design.
like you've got me thinking about that, and I'm trying to figure out how a sort of 4D like type experience with Rec would be. Um, it would be something I'd like to pay. If I had the money, I'd like to pay someone to try and figure that out just to see what it looks like.
Yeah, even if it's like because I know like we think about like big action movies, so you're like moving, 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 but like I almost even think like slow tilts, slow movement to kind of
Mhm,
get you like almost like just to kind of throw you off balance a little bit in like a horror movie would probably be really. I mean, you have to really like you know be subtle with it, but I
mhm.
think it could add probably a lot. But anyway, that's just where my fair warning, my ADHD, my brain will go in different directions. But what's the most claustrophobic you've ever felt speaking just about in a movie?
um, I think Rec does have a couple of moments that are up there. I think mostly of the scene where they walk into like the sort of apartment and like they're looking down a hallway and they see the woman standing there that ends up attacking them. The
Hmm.
way that she then charges them down and keeps them trapped almost in that corner, that did sort of like spike my anxiety a little. That was a little like I'm not fully comfortable with this. Um, Other stuff, I can't really think of much off the top of my head. I think going back to it, I think the others does a pretty good job sometimes of feeling that sort of claustrophobic nature almost.
Sure.
Nowhere near to the same like depth as something like Rec does. But I think those movies in general, like Rec 1 through 3, are all pretty good at like channeling that like claustrophobic feeling.
I've never seen the sequels. Funny enough, I should probably go back. And do you like them compared to the first one?
I think the second one is definitely worth it. The third one isn't connected as much, but 1 and 2 are like basically direct sequels to one another.
Oh.
The third one takes place somewhere else. I can't remember if it loops back eventually.
Hmm.
The fourth one, they kind of, not to like spoil any plot elements, but they do drop the found footage aspect, and that for me lost a lot of the like what made them scary. That one feels the closest to generic that the franchise gets for me.
Yeah. Well, you were telling me, so found footage is one of your favorite, or is
Yeah.
your favorite subgenre?
Well, I'd put probably slashers up here, but then you've got found footage like right beside it near enough. So yeah, they're
Yeah.
both up there as like my favorites.
Well, maybe. Well, I think we're still waiting for a combined. Well, I know Leslie Vernon, I guess, is a found footagey kind of documentary style, at least
Yeah,
for
you know,
slashers.
it's funny you bring that one up because that has been on my watch list for the longest time. I nearly put it on last week and then I fell asleep. So it's one of those that I'm gonna get round to it eventually because it does just seem like right on my alley, like a mix of like two of my
Yeah.
favorite subgenres. But I've not got around to it
And
yet.
I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of cameos in that one too. Like I'm
Okay,
pretty sure Robert Englund's in that movie.
right.
Um, yeah, there's a lot of. Hold on, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, Robert Englund is in it. Zelda Rubinstein from Poltergeist, who I love, she's in it. Um, yeah, like yeah, you definitely check it out.
I will do. I'll see to it that I watch it tonight.
Oh, do it. Yeah, and then you got to let me know. So I guess you know what, let's skip around this list for a second because we can kind of stick with the found footage. Cloverfield is your next one.
Yeah. Cloverfield was a movie. Like, obviously, I know prior to the release, again, I wasn't into horror really when this came out, so I wasn't around for the whole ARG surrounding it coming out. But it
Oh
was
yeah,
one
that
of
was
those.
I
It
remember
was
that well. That was fun.
Yeah, it was one of those things where I saw the ARG first, and I was looking at it on YouTube. And I was reading through like all the stuff that happened. Um, and it eventually like started talking about how it led to the movie, and I was like, you know what, I kind of want to see where this movie goes. Um, because it was so interesting to me. And when I watched the movie, I remember finishing it and just thinking that is not at all what I expected, like the end result of like what I've just been listening to be.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I love it. I think it combines found footage with another like not favorite subgenre, but more of a guilty pleasure of like monster movies. Like I think we all like we enjoy a good monster movie from time to time, and I think Cloverfield just has that right mix of keeping the suspense with the monster. The fact that even today, like what 16 years after it came out, I think we still don't know anything about it really,
Not
besides like a
really.
sort of end credits like appearance in the third film, which the less said about that the better. Um,
Not a fan of Paradox.
I I like 10 Cloverfield Lane. Paradox didn't really do it for me. I probably need to rewatch it, but I don't think my opinion is going to change much on it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I will say, I know there was not really an ARG, but I was like shook when they just sort of like it was like a Super Bowl thing, and they were like, "Out now,
Yeah,
Cloverfield
it's like
3," and I was like,
surprise.
"What?" That was wild. But yeah, no, 10 Cloverfield, fantastic. But yeah, no, the first one,
Another amazing
it's my
movie.
favorite found footage movie is Cloverfield, actually.
I think that's a completely fair one to have. I think Rec does edge it for me, but like Cloverfield is such an influential movie for me as well because it's if I look back through all of the horror movies that I love, it's still the one that I'm craving a sequel to most. Like I know we've had 10 Cloverfield Lane, we've had Paradox, but we've not had like a sequel. And I know there is like
Yeah.
murmurs that something like that might be happening, but it's something that even today I still actively really really want. Um, but I think the cast, as much as I can't really remember many of the names, I don't think there's a lot of well known people in there. Um,
Closest ones, I love Lizzie Kaplan. So she's the one that gets gurneyed away and explodes.
yeah,
She's in Mean Girls and she was in Masters of Sex. I think she's the most like successful. But then is it Jason? Was it Jason Ritter? No.
I suppose you do have is it T.J. Miller behind the camera a lot of the time.
TJ Miller, that's right, that's right. Although his career is in an interesting place right now.
Yeah,
Mike
that
Vogel.
might be
Oh,
it.
and Jessica Lucas.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
but
Oh,
then
so Mike
besides that, I think.
Vogel
Sorry, you go
hasn't done
ahead.
much lately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the cool thing about that movie as well is I think and this is an underrated aspect of a lot of like great horror movies that the more unknown the cast is, especially with found footage stuff, the more real and immersive it can be. Because like I think, for example, if you had a pretty well known actor, like on screen a lot of the time, it probably would feel a lot less authentic. But compared to the fact that I personally haven't seen a whole lot of these people outside of this movie, it does
Yeah.
help a lot, like in engaging that suspension and that like immersion with the film.
Yeah. Well, I would say yeah. I think all the because I was 18 at the time when this movie came out. I was like, the only person that we all knew was Lizzie Kaplan from Mean Girls because that
Mm.
was. And then other than that, yeah, because like you said, you're more of a 2000s baby. So Mean
Yeah,
Girls might have been. What year were you born?
2000.
You were born in 2000. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So you were 4, I think, when Mean Girls came out, right? So
not
yeah,
far
yeah,
off.
like
Yeah.
she's the only one I think that we all really would have like known for sure. Everyone
Mhm.
else was sort of like this is like the beginning of their career. Um, but even then, they haven't all really done much. It's so yeah, no, I think you're right. I think when you can really sort of when you're not putting it right, it's like sort of like you had like Leonardo DiCaprio in a found footage movie. You're like, well, that's Leonardo DiCaprio in a found
Yeah.
footage movie, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where like I think that that's so important, and it's why I have so much respect that found footage continues to get lesser known faces in, because like you said, if Leonardo DiCaprio just randomly appears, it instantly breaks any immersion because immediately you can identify him with 1,000 other things you've seen, or maybe not 1,000, but you get what I'm trying to say.
Oh, absolutely.
um I think that like found footage, the idea of the unknown cast is almost what sells it in a weird way, because that's the make
Sure.
or break aspect for me, at least for me personally.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think right because it's the idea of like because there's almost like an illusion to found footage, right?
Yeah,
It's this idea that it is found footage, right? So you're supposed to sort of buy into the sort of disbelief or suspension of disbelief of like, okay,
yeah,
we're watching. Like I mean, like obviously Blair Witch, right? The OG, right? People actually some. And we'll actually even well that's not the OG. I love Ghost Watch, the BBC one.
yes, yeah, it's so good.
That's freaking, but I guess like the OG found even I'm even thinking like, the whole like oh my god, War of the Worlds thing, the whole
Yeah,
where they thought
the
it was
the radio,
right,
the radio broadcasting.
the broadcast, yeah,
Yeah,
like that that made people think it actually happened back in whatever it was, the 40s.
yeah,
Um Hilarious. But yeah, so I mean I guess that's the OG, but if we're talking about movies, right? You got
yeah.
Blair Witch and then
I think
um
that's another thing that you mentioned, Ghostwatch. There, I love when a movie can, almost break that fourth wall in a weird way, because with Ghostwatch, a lot of the roles that the people are playing is the roles they normally play outside of the
well
film
they were real
itself.
newscasters, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
almost it's like kind of similar, going back to Rec. What I love about the lead actress in that is that, if I'm not mistaken, it has been a while since I like covered it on the channel. They did she is a reporter outside of the film. And I think that as well, after learning that fact, it was like every time I watch this now, there's going to be another element of realism, because I know that that's what she does outside of the film. And that almost leads to how authentic her performance as a reporter could be.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Don't like 100% quote me on it, because again, I can't remember for sure, but I'm fairly certain that that's what she did, like
Okay.
outside of the
Yeah,
film.
yeah, yeah. Well, I can't fact check you right now, so I'm gonna take your word for it. You're the expert coming on today. Um. So yeah, I mean, yeah. Other than yeah, so Cloverfield. Any other favorite bits before we go on to our last one?
I love the scene in the subway tunnel is
Mm.
like the standout aspect of the movie for me. I do love the big scene from the top of the skyscraper when you can see Clover charging through the streets. But I think purely in tapping into, and again going back to the claustrophobic elements, that scene in the subway tunnel it's so condensed, it feels so airtight, purely because of the like limited light too.
Oh, sure.
um, and they almost like, I know they're not, but they almost face hugger type looking creatures rushing at them just adds this whole
Yeah.
other level of urgency to the scene that like heightens the horror even more for me.
Oh, hands down. Yeah, I'm a New Yorker, so like when that movie came out, and like when I was in the city, I was like, okay, yeah, this is that part of the movie, and this is that part of the movie.
Like, stay
Uh,
away from this street.
yeah. Well, I always think of Spring Street because I think that was the station they got off on or went to,
Hmm.
and so every time I'm downtown, like I'm thinking of that. I don't live in Manhattan. I'm just north of it. At the time, I was
Right.
living on Long Island, which is east of Manhattan. Um, But yeah, no, it's fun. Anytime something takes place in New York, I love it. But yeah, so you're number 5. Well, there wasn't any real order, like you said, but Invisible Man.
Mm.
This is the remake from not James Wan, Lee
Lee
Winnell.
Winnell.
Lee
Yeah.
Winnell.
Yeah, I think it's a really good movie in my eyes. It obviously came off the back of the whole like attempt to reboot the Dark Universe, and then they sort of split it off, made it its own thing, and I think that ultimately helped it be the movie that it is.
Yeah,
Um, I think it's probably one of the better movies that I've seen like since the turn of 2020 that handles suspense and builds suspense in such a natural and like fluent way.
yeah,
It never really seems as if it jumps from point to point. It seems to like steadily transition there instead. And I think that again, it's another movie that I don't see getting talked about a whole lot, and maybe that's because I'm one of the odd ones out that does really like the movie. But like solid direction, solid cinematography. I think the performance from Elizabeth Moss is again fantastic. Probably one of my favorites in the last few years with horror,
yeah.
definitely.
Oh, it's a great movie. I mean, I think obviously, comes to mind, my Drew Barrymore scene of the movie, right? Is the dinner scene, right? Is
Yeah.
sort of that's the big moment.
Mhm.
Yeah, the suspense, hands down, I think is incredible. I love this movie. I guess maybe it doesn't get talked about as much because so much has happened movie wise since then,
Mhm.
right? Was it 2020 was the movie?
Yeah, because I feel like we were talking about this just before we like hit record that it was like the last movie that I saw before COVID-19 shut everything down.
Yeah,
So I think the reason also that it sits with me that much is because of that very thing, the fact that I was able to sit with that as like my final cinema experience, at least for a good year or so.
yeah, because I think that was like February of 2020. Was
Yeah,
that? Yeah, it was like Valentine's Day sort of time period. Um, Yeah, no, that was it's because now it feels like so long ago, but it was this decade, which is
yeah.
insane.
It's weird to think about when you look at the 2020 release date beside the film.
Yeah. That was no, I enjoy. I love Lee Winnell. He's one of my favorite like horror, like modern horror influences. I
Mm-hmm.
would probably up there. I mean, like James Wan, Guillermo del Toro, sort of like the these newer. Well, Guillermo del Toro's been in the scene for a while, but this sort of modern classic wave of Jordan Peele, you know but yeah, no, Lee Winnell is phenomenal because what else does he was off Saw, you
Yeah,
know
he starred in Saw. He directed a film called Upgrade, which I've not seen. I don't think it's horror, but I've heard really good things about it. So
hmm
he's got a proven track record at least for being a consistent director quality wise. Like even though he's only I think got 2 projects out.
what didn't
Um,
he work on like the later Insidious movies, if I'm not mistaken?
Saying that, I think he did direct the third one
Yeah.
with Stephanie Scott. But I think apart from that, a lot of his main credits comes from writing.
Yeah, predominantly writing. So let me, if I drop his actor credit, he wrote Red Door. He did Upgrade. This is the writing. Last Key. City. I think he wrote all the Insidious movies.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he wrote all of them. One obviously directed, but he wrote them. Yeah.
Okay.
Um. So really cool. Yeah, really cool stuff. Yeah. Saw he wrote. Saw 1, 2. Well, co-wrote with James Wan. So James Wan was he was sort of James Wan's like protege, like his sort of apprentice.
Yeah.
And then Wan was just sort of like, here you go. So
I
yeah, so
think
they kind of came up together.
yeah, I think Lee Winnell. I definitely want to see him doing more horror. I think that The Invisible Man proves that he does. If his writing credits don't speak for that like already, the directing on The Invisible Man, in my eyes, shows that he has such a keen eye for it. Like, there's just a lot of scenery and a lot of ideas there that I think we could do with seeing a lot more of in horror.
Yeah.
Um, I think the way that he frames the otherness, the Invisible Man himself, despite him not being something that you can see all that much, I think he does such a good job of capturing like the fear in that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think right. I think as far as the tension, the fear, The relationship, obviously, there's a lot of like sort of abusive relationship kind of metaphors and not
Mhm.
meta. I mean, is that pretty explicit? I guess in this movie, but
Yeah.
um, it really in the blend. I love a good blend of sci-fi and horror.
Mhm.
Even if it's like subtle sci-fi, right? Which is a lot of those early 30s, 40s horror movies were really kind of really sci-fi movies.
Yeah, that's you look back to the like the original Invisible Man from James Whale, I think directed it. The that is very much rooted in like a sort of early sci-fi type way, and I like that rather than bringing up some sort of magical element or like some sort of like science element from that 1930s movie. Instead, what they decided to do is like bring the concept of the Invisible Man into modern times and had the whole thing with the suit that was almost reflective. I can't remember the
Mm-hmm.
exact the exact mechanics of the suit, but I know it was something to do with like cameras and reflecting the light.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was almost like oh gosh, Angel uh and Radar, where they do two friends in a conspiracy. And they were talking about what I forgot what it was, that what episode. Was it that one or was it actually no, nope, we were doing an author interview. Sorry, I'm like confusing two different stories. We were doing an author interview and it had to do with like teleportation. And but one of the things that they talked about conspiracy wise was like within it, there's like this government conspiracy around like making a plane invisible, and it was all like reflective, and it was supposed to like kind of get through like radars or something like that. So yeah, just sort of taking these sort of like fringe science concepts that you see in
Yeah,
conspiracy theories, but putting it as part of this film. Yeah, no, really interesting kind of approach to kind of go. But yeah, so outside of that, we have some honorable mentions to go through.
we do.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I love this first one. The Scooby Doo on Zombie Island as a gateway horror. I love it. I'm a big Scooby Doo fan. So is this something you saw as a kid pretty early on?
Yeah, this is the first thing. I know I said that the others was the first horror movie I watched. Scooby Doo on Zombie Island is very much like the first horror experience that I had.
Oh,
I
it,
think
it
giving
counts as a horror movie. It's a kid's
yeah,
horror movie, but
it's
it's a horror.
definitely it's a gateway horror, right? Is
Yeah.
the best way I put it. It was one of those where I did have it on VHS. It was probably one of the only VHS tapes that I had. Rest assured that by the time I was done with that thing, it didn't work anymore. The tape had all come undone, just because of how often I'd watch it. I think I'll always have a soft spot in my heart because I'll always attribute it to something that set me on the path to being the horror fan that I am today. I think it's such a
Yeah.
standout from the other Scooby Doo stuff, where a lot of the time it's just revealed as, oh, it's a guy in a mask. Like this time, the terror was real, and I think that almost did help in a weird way in setting me on the path of horror because it did feel more scary knowing that these were real
Yeah.
monsters going after them this time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for me it was like those like the Goosebumps and like Are You Afraid of the Dark was that, but
Yeah.
like Scooby Doo, I think always sort of yeah, even though it always sort of turned out to be a person in a mask, like that is like a real gateway horror for a lot of people. Since it was the 60s, I think Scooby Doo started. Yeah, and those like the around this time, the movies were really good. It was Zombie
Mhm.
Island, and funny enough, the one I played a lot as a kid was you ever see Cyber Chase?
I did that. Like my four like Scooby Doo like my Mount Rushmore of Scooby Doo movies, if you will. It's Zombie Island, Cyber Chase, Witch's Ghost, and
Hmm.
there's one other that I can't think of. Um, Maybe it's just the three. But those three, I didn't get to see the other two till a little later. But Zombie Island definitely was the sort of foundation of it. But Cyber Chase
Yeah.
also is so good.
Yeah, there's a couple of series I have never seen. Our friend Norin, he did a whole like he watched like all of the Scooby Doo series, the movies, and did like a big ranking of them all. Super
All right,
impressive. Yeah, he blew my mind away when he did those. But like
I'm gonna have to give that a go. I'm gonna have to give that a try then. That sounds
yeah,
quite
like watch his
interesting.
rankings. It's really and then I'm gonna they've been on my watch list for a while, but like some of I took pretty much like the top like three or four that I had never seen.
Mhm.
I put them on my tracker. I got to watch them. But there's like some like series in there from like the maybe the mid to late 2000s that I didn't know even existed that looked
Yeah.
really good. Obviously, there's like the 13 Ghosts of Scooby Doo, right? Uh, But this next honorable mention you have on here, I had not seen this one till a little more recently, but I loved it, and that's Triangle.
Yes, the biggest like what have I just watched movie.
Yeah.
I initially I think I first heard of this off of the Dead Meat podcast.
Yes.
And often I'll listen to the podcast without watching the movie sometimes because I'm just not as interested. But something about the way that they were saying, like, you want to see this one before listening to this, I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this one a go. I'll give this a try. And I am so glad that I did because I know it's not the greatest. It's got that whole thing with the digital look that makes it look kind of cheap and sleazy. But for the most part, it's probably one of the most fun, some of the most fun I've had watching a horror movie, just because of how many like loopholes it throws you through consistently.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, absolutely. I think you're second guessing what's going on like every
Yeah,
5 minutes.
it's like
Like,
after the second twist hits you, you really don't know what's real anymore.
no. Yeah, no, because you're going in one direction, and it's like, all right, where do you go from here? And then, like you said, like another twist comes in, and you're like, all right, now I really no clue where this movie's going.
Yeah,
No, that's a fun one. Yeah, that's we won't spoil it on this episode. But
no.
if anyone has not seen Triangle, I believe it's on Shutter. Probably streaming in a couple other places as well, but at least in the US, I know it's on Shutter. Do you guys have Shutter or
We do.
UK?
Our selection kind of works the same as Netflix compared to like the US Netflix. It's nowhere near as good. Um, I'm personally not subscribed to it just because a lot of my films I like to like buy the Blu-rays and try them that way.
Oh,
But of
sure.
course, if there's ever movies that appear on there that I can't get access to a Blu-ray of, like I know there's been a couple, I will sign up to it and give it a watch that way. I do love the service. It's just again, money is a thing, and I'd rather just
Oh,
buy the movies physically.
we're not sponsored by Shutter. Don't worry. You're good. I don't care. That's a great thing with some of these subscription services. It's like you can get it for the month, watch what you need to watch, cancel it, and then get it
Yeah,
again many months later.
I mean that's what I tend to do. For the month of October, the last like 2 years in a row, I've signed up for Shudder, and I've just spent it watching a lot of horror movies that I wouldn't normally look at. So I think for someone getting into horror, I think like again, like not sponsored. I'm not trying to like shill anything here. I do think Shudder's a really good streaming platform for things like that. Like you said, with Triangle being on there, if it is, that's a really great thing for people to watch if they're looking for something different on there. And their selection is great. It's really varied.
Oh yeah. No, I've definitely seen some really good, like just hidden gems or older
Mhm.
films I just hadn't gotten around to seeing yet. Yeah, it's really good for that kind of stuff. All right, our last sort of honorable mention for the episode, Lake Mungo. So going back to our found footage.
Yeah, there's a bit of a theme developing here with the films that I've gave you.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's cool though.
I think it's interesting that we call it found footage though, because I noticed it more so it was a term that I learned more about when I covered Lake Mungo a few years ago. But it almost falls under more of like a pseudo documentary type appeal.
Mockumentary,
Um,
pseudo doc. Yeah.
yeah, like the found footage aspect of it is there, and it leads to probably one of my favorite jump scares in horror, because it just of how effective it is and how like different it feels from the rest of the movie. But
Mhm.
for the most part, I like to look at it more as a documentary or a mockumentary than a found footage film itself.
Yeah, oh, sure. Oh, absolutely. So like, I think I told you, so Angel and I, we have our found footage Fridays. And
Mhm.
so like found footage, I guess, is almost like sort of the umbrella term, right?
Yeah,
And then I guess it's sort of the mockumentary would be a sub genre
yeah,
within that, right? It's been I know mockumentaries are actually my favorite um kind of found footage movies. So yeah, like Mungo, I was floored when I saw this. Um, Going back to sort of like your, one of your original points when we first started, about how you like to dive into sort of the emotional connection of movies, right? And that's
yeah.
really what Lake Mungo is all about, right?
Oh, that was Lake Mungo is probably. I think back to like not to plug myself, but thinking back to all of the films that I've covered, Lake Mungo is definitely the most I've had to really put myself in the shoes of like be like how I feel looking at the film emotionally, purely because of the film. It doesn't really take precedence till after, but it is genuinely so bleak. It's probably one of the more tragic films that I can think of off the top of my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's sort of like, yeah, it's kind of movie like when you think about it, it kind of just gives you that little like
Mhm.
pit in your stomach,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, no, it's very yeah, it's a sad film. And you were saying like, are influential with Anthony, which will be out before this one. We really talk about ghost movies and just sort of the core feeling of ghost movies being just that sadness, right? And I think Lake
Mhm.
Mungo just really we talked about it there too, just really nails that sort of emotional dagger. But
Yeah.
yeah, all right. Any so we're at the end of our list. So at this point in the show, I always like to just, is there anything coming up for Media 13 that you want to, you know,
Well,
advertise, let know?
I never like to reveal anything too early because my upload schedule changes from month to month. Like
Fair enough.
sometimes I'm going into it thinking I'm going to do weekly uploads. Other times I'm thinking I don't know why I've suggested such a thing. Um, I know that I actually do have a video on the others, which is filmed and I'm in the middle of editing it. That will be the next thing out.
Great.
Um, I'm hoping to cover Late Night with the Devil as well pretty soon. And obviously Scream. It's one of the big things that I'm working on in the background now. I'm starting to, prepare video essay scripts for like all the films 1 through 6, and then a two-parter for the TV series as well.
Hmm,
Which is, it's taking its time because there's surprisingly little left online about that TV series. But it's something that I have seen, so I'm trying to do bit by bit from memory.
sure. Yeah, I know that's great. That's 6 movies and 3 seasons of a show.
Yeah,
Um, it's a lot to cover.
it is. I'm not. It won't be. It won't be one of these things where they're all out fluid. I think I do have like a provisional upload schedule of things that I'd like to cover, and only one part, only the video for Scream 1 and maybe Scream 2 are like listed for this year. I think it's definitely something that's going to run into next year purely because of how much planning, how much research that I'm trying to put into it. I'm trying to make them a lot more, not only like looking at like my emotional connection to the franchise, but also trying to look at more of the technical and behind the scenes aspects too, to make them more of an informational slash emotional like retrospective look back on all the films.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is so much to be said about those movies on screen and behind. I think
Yeah,
there's a wealth, like just a whole endless wealth of things to pull from.
yeah,
All
and that's
right.
just looking at the stuff that's happened in the last few months.
You can do a whole series on that. On
Yeah,
on the
definitely.
on the lead up to 7. This is going to be a whole expose, unofficial documentary,
Yeah.
tell all the there's going to be a lot coming out. But Jordan, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a
Thank you
blast.
for having me.
Yeah. And so, everyone, thank you for checking out our influential horror series. And be sure to check out Jordan on Media 13. We'll have a link for, we'll link to your channel. So, you can do this, you can tag things now on YouTube. So, we'll tag you. People can go right to your channel so they can check out your awesome video essays.
Thank you, man.
My pleasure. All right, everyone. We'll catch you next time. Take care.